Fox News has decided to let go of Tucker Carlson. He was one of their prize hosts, if not the most prized host, and they decided to let him go. Now they're claiming it's on neutral terms and it was a mutual split, but Fox News and the people behind Fox News have a stake in how Fox News is run in the future. And so you have Rupert Murdoch and you have the people who have a stake at Fox. And there's a few reasons why Tucker was let go. The main reasons are, okay, we have Fox News, which is towing the line of the establishment narrative, and they have to ensure that for their cable news network to survive, they understand there are powers above them, and so they have to let go of their most controversial prized asset, even though it was getting them the most amount of views, the most amount of money, in terms of views translating to advertiser revenue. They had to let Tucker go because he was asking too many questions, too much skepticism regarding artificial intelligence, regarding UAPs, unidentified aerial phenomenon, previously UFOs. He was asking too many questions about what was going on behind the scenes, behind the political facade of January 6th and the economy, things of that nature. This comes right after the huge lawsuit over the Dominion scandal. And so we have Tucker Carlson, who had a primetime television network, a show on the network, and he was bringing people in like Elon Musk to ask questions about the changes in our society. Very good questions. He wasn't, of course, he was making statements of how X causes Y and how there are certain negative ramifications that come about, how changes in industry are occurring and changes within the political regime are occurring. But he was asking questions that provoked intellectual thought, right? Critical thinking. And these are skills that generally the establishment does not want us to use. So when you have someone who's challenging you from a mental point of view, and you have to sit there and think, you have to try to connect dots and gather different data and different points of circumstantial evidence and see what you can come up with, what you can conclude. This is a threat to all of the parties, not just political, financial, ideological, all of the different parties who have a stake in controlling labor and resources. So naturally, Rupert Murdoch, who's the owner of Fox, and all the people around the situation, they had either to comply with FCC, which is a regulatory body for networks that are airing on television, which, by the way, is unconstitutional. It infringes on the right to freely speak and right to freely associate, to assemble, and to express yourself. We don't have this for the internet. We have it with the internet with platforms, but when it comes to cable news, cable networks in general, there's an FCC. They control the radio waves and the waves of television. So either Fox News was they were weary about FCC coming in and regulating them. They were weary about people who are heavy on the left, whether they're in Congress or part of the executive branch, coming in and enforcing authority to shut them down or to shrink their operations. And or they were coerced or working with these government bodies and regulatory agencies to ensure that they would still hit their financial profits, they would still hit their ideological motives, their incentives, while still aligning with the status quo. See, if you're an outcast to the status quo, this is a threat, and now you're the target. And so you don't want to paint yourself as the target. Now, if we look at other countries, what do other countries do? Other countries, they have their own state propaganda. We understand this if we look at Russia, if we look at China, any of these socialist authoritarian regimes, they have their own state propaganda, and they spread it through, historically it's been through newspaper and radio, but of course now we have TV, we have the internet. We can understand here in America that there are 3, 4, 5 different channels, whether it's online or on their TV news network, 3 or 4, 5 channels that are still part of the state, but they come with a different slice of perspective. So it looks like to the people there in Russia and China that they're getting different perspectives. They're really getting a narrow perspective with, maybe 30 degrees of movement. So instead of the whole 360 degrees, they're getting 30 degrees of movement. But each TV show, each channel is just tilted 4 degrees, 3 degrees, whatever. So it looks as if it's different, coming from a slightly different perspective, but it's all still part of the same perspective. You're never really getting all of the different information, all of the different perspectives. You really have to, in America, we have access to it, but you have to go and search that out. And so the average person is not, they don't have the interest, time, or energy to go and search this out, right? The average person is working a 9 to 5, then they have kids, then they got bills to pay, then they want to have some leisure time, they want to have entertainment. So they're just going to throw on whatever's on the TV. That's easily accessible. And the people who own the networks and the people who own the industry, they understand that as well. So when you turn on the TV, whether you're a Democrat, Republican, independent, it doesn't really matter, and you see Fox News, you see CNN, you see MSNBC, you see ABC, you see NBC, these are the channels of information that are being distributed towards you. So that's all you're getting. If you don't have the interest, energy, time, or potentially resources, if it's behind a paywall, to go out on the internet, and this is becoming increasingly more difficult, because if you go on the internet, you can find these independent creators and you can find different sorts of information, but then you have to filter out the information for yourself. And many people are not willing to do the critical work necessary to filter out the information, because that requires work. Even if you go online to independent creators, there are independent creators who are controlled opposition. There are independent creators who are brainwashed part of the status quo, so they may be heavily on the left. There are independent creators who are crazy on the right, anarchists. It's very hard to find the right perspective. And it's not like you want to necessarily find this one channel or one show and just stick with that show or channel. You want to gather multiple data points so you can come up with your own conclusion. The problem is most people, like I said, they don't have the time, energy, or let's just keep it at time and energy to do all that. They want to watch one TV show, get their answer, move on with their day. The problem with that is now it forms your worldview. It forms your perspective. So you have talking heads, you have anchors who they themselves 99% of the time don't understand the information or the depth of how far something goes, the layers to the information. They don't understand how deep it goes. So they're just regurgitating what they're being given. They're reading off scripts. Now, Tucker was the star of Fox News. Without Tucker, they really don't have anyone else. No one else is asking questions the way he was asking questions. No one else is doing investigative journalism the way he was doing it. He's not just someone who's on the right. He's been in media for 30 years. He's been on other shows who we would presume is on the left. So he's been across the board. He has most recently, at his time in Fox, been getting on people, asking questions, and provoking thought. And so when we see someone like this get dismissed, we have to ask the question, if all of these businesses care about is money, and we know that short-term and potentially medium-term, losing Tucker would be a huge blow to Fox News, they're giving up their financial interest for something. What are they giving it up for? Well, potentially long-term financial interest, or just ideology, or just to stay afloat. Like I said before, they have to work with government bodies, or they're being coerced by government bodies to structure themselves in a way where they're still towing that establishment line. We see this all the time with other news networks, but in America, we don't question it. We think our press is free. We have the right to petition government. We have a right to have a free press. That's in our Constitution. That's the First Amendment. But now we're seeing our press work with federal agencies, work with government bodies, so that their interests align ideologically and financially, and they now have power over reach. So even if we do have all these independent creators and you can go on all these different internet platforms, there's so much social media out there, and even if you can find that independent news, and even if you're willing to sift through the information, most people are not willing to do that. And the people who run these networks, the people who run these huge channels, the people who control all these different anchors and hosts, they understand that. They understand the majority of the population is just going to tune into one channel. They're just going to get their news from one place. And even if they do go the independent route, they go on YouTube, that's really the biggest player out here, they're still going to follow one of the major creators who's putting out news similar to their worldview. And so they're really only getting that one perspective. There's actually been studies on this where people on the right, the study was to look at people on the right and look at people on the left and see what type of news that they consume and where their news skews. And most people on the left, their news skews from other people on the left. For people on the right, a majority of their news is very diverse. That's not to say they still don't consume their own worldview. They do, of course, but a vast majority is gathering other perspectives. And that's a very stark contrast from people on the left. And so when we understand how the structure works, where we're seeing someone who was on the mainstream media news, okay, he was on Fox News, that's establishment, and he was trying to break through in a sense that he even gave up a huge chunk of his salary so that he could control the narrative for his show. He wanted more control over the show. Of course, we can look at contracts and see that Fox News has him in potentially golden handcuffs, so he can't do anything. Maybe there's a non-compete, and they're still willing to pay the remainder of his salary to make sure that he doesn't say anything, and that could even potentially last till or even after the next presidential cycle. And so we also have elected officials like AOC coming in and stating, well, it's good that Tucker Carlson was kicked off because he was spouting a lot of misinformation. We even have the Pentagon, who's supposed to be, well, from the outside, they're supposed to be a neutral body, but of course they're political, right? Everything is political. So even if you're the Pentagon, you're generally going to be at the political bias of what structure is in control. So if the structure in control has a certain political bias and they love war because they ideologically or maybe just financially profit off of that, and you're part of the Pentagon, you're most likely going to identify or be in alignment with that political interest. So even the Pentagon is coming out and saying that it's good that Tucker was fired for X, Y, and Z reasons. So when we have elected officials and we have federal agencies, the Pentagon is the military apparatus of the United States government, and they're praising that someone is getting kicked off for preaching a different perspective, whether you agree with it or not. They're going against the Constitution in the sense that the Constitution is allowing different perspectives for this very reason of making sure that whether you're an elected official or you're part of the federal government in some capacity, you're not being, they are not suppressing you. So if you have elected officials and government bodies and they're suppressing individuals, they're suppressing the press, they're suppressing businesses, that's an infringement of the First Amendment. We have the First Amendment so that we can have a check and balance against those who have authority and power. Otherwise, they can get away with anything, and that's really not what we want. So when we look at this situation, this is not a good situation. Now, Tucker will be fine. Tucker has a huge audience. Even if we look at his Twitter, Elon Musk controls Twitter. Elon Musk is more so than other social media founders and creators and CEOs. He's on the side of free speech, not completely. There are many things that he's very opinionated on that go against free speach. But Tucker's on Twitter. And even Tucker on Twitter is getting a lot of views. He posted a short little video a few days ago, probably by the time this video comes out, a week ago. And that got tens of millions of views. And so he still has an audience. He will still be able to create. But this is very different because the majority of people are going to tune into Fox News. They're going to tune into CNN. They're going to see whatever's on that break room at work. They're going to see whatever's on the TV in the airport. So the average person is none the wiser. This is probably not even on the radar for the average person. But when you have these huge conglomerates and their entire structure is not praised on, or it's not based on distributing information that is going to make you think and see different perspectives, it's okay if there's far-fetched perspectives out there. You don't have to agree with it, but at least you have access to it. At least you're receiving that so you can make your own judgment. When these structures start to disintegrate those pathways, and they understand that you're not going to go out and seek the information on your own. And even on these other platforms with independent creators, these platforms are also suppressing people through visibility filtering, through shadow banning, making sure that the views are stuck at a certain place so that they can't gain more popularity or the reach of the video can't spread out. This is why we have Rumble now. We have other platforms that are coming out because we're seeing all of these nefarious actions, even on so-called places that are embodying free speech. They're not truly embodying free speech, but they're supposed to be embodying free speech separate from cable news or cable TV in general. Even they are suppressing because there is a political, ideological, and financial motive, mainly ideological, because the ideology translates long-term to financial profit. When you control 100% of a market or an industry, you control the consumer. And you control the money that comes in, you control the good, the service. So long-term, you control the financial motive. But this is much bigger than that. And so we need to empower individuals, independent creators, but also these structures, these institutions, these media institutions, we also have to hold them accountable, even though they're private businesses. Now, if they're working with the federal government, now that's an infringement. Now you have fascistic regimes, a fascistic regime where you have corporations working in tandem with government. So now they are that's even more of a reason to scrutinize them. That's even more of a reason to hold them accountable and to speak out against this because they're going to keep doing what they're doing. And I've said this time and time again, but it always is reliant on the minority of the population to make actual change, not just in this country, but in any other nation in the world. Whether we look at the Civil War, the American Revolution, the French Revolution, and there's good and bad perspectives to all of those events and events in general. But only the minority of the population actually induce change. And so if we understand the psychology of the average person, where they're going to be content with just turning on cable news, and you'll have tons of people who still watch Fox News. They'll still watch Laura Ingraham. They'll still watch Sean Hannity. They'll watch Jesse Waters. You might have some people on Fox News also get kicked out as well because they're also pushing that boundary of the establishment, the status quo narrative. And so what we're really going to get is it looks like a conservative lens is being thrown on the news when people look at Fox News, but they're just getting the same information as they would on any other network, but with a slight tilt, a 20-degree tilt. And so it's never too far from the main narrative. If I painted an example, it would be like, let's say there's an armed robbery situation and the news is reporting on it. Now, naturally, let's say it's on all the news networks, and let's say on the leftist media, they're showing perspective A. Perspective A is this guy came in with a weapon and he held this convenience store up and X, Y, and Z happened. Now we need to go after gun control. And let's say you look at Fox News, which is really the only cable news conservative media outlet there is. And they're just taking a slight tilted angle and saying, well, look, he came in with a weapon, but if the other person had a weapon, it would be totally different. Now those are the only two perspectives you're getting. And one perspective, the outcast perspective, the conservative perspective, is just a slight tilt from the main status quo perspective. We're not getting all the other perspectives. What if all the other perspectives included things like, well, this was a gun-free zone, and that's actually the problem. Or there was massive regulation in this city where the city was passing unconstitutional laws that were going against the supreme law of the land, and they were actually empowering the criminals, or they were letting criminals out on bail, right? I'm just painting different perspectives here. These would not be included in the story, whether you're looking at the CNN, Fox News, leftist media versus right media. And so you would have to actually go out to independent creators and look for that. Now, the whole long-term goal is to consolidate these media networks, consolidate these media outlets, so that really you're just getting that one narrative to the majority of the population, 80% of the population, if we're using Pareto's principle. And over time, these power structures want to cover the cracks with independent creators, so that independent creators who are saying a different narrative can't come out and say anything. And even if they do get through the cracks, well, there's enough of a push from the mainstream media, and there's enough of the psychological manipulation, and also the understanding that people are lazy, inherently lazy, so they're going to take the easiest way out, the easiest route, right? They're just going to watch cable news network. They turn on the remote, it's right there. They don't have to go look for it, they don't have to think, they just get the answers right to them. Preying on that psychological ability and also the suppression factor, the power structures understand that people are not going to go out and seek independent creators, and these independent creators are effectively useless. I mean, they may say whatever they want, but it won't reach anyone. It won't go anywhere. So that's a long-term goal. And that was a long macro viewing of this Tucker situation. But this Tucker situation is a good example of how you can have someone on cable news who is wildly popular, bringing in revenue, views, etc. And this person will still be canned because even the quote-unquote conservative outlet still has to toe the status quo line. And if people don't understand how this works by now, by this explanation, and maybe you still need to do further due diligence, then we're living in scary times where the suppression of truth, the suppression of information and basic data, just basic facts. I mean, facts are being flipped upside down right now. There are websites that are going against what would, if we researched them 5-10 years ago, it's a fact. If we research them now, these websites are saying, well, it's partially false, partially true. They're slowly changing what the truth is. Now, the victors, typically the people who have more power, they will always change the history in their favor. And the victors aren't always the good guys. The victors are just the people who have power. It's easiest to consolidate power when mutual interests align. And typically that means that there are shortcuts involved, collateral interest, your individual rights, people's lives. That's when we have the truth censored at such a huge scale, it's hard to reverse it and go back to what we had before.